The active business of the American Revolution began in Philadelphia. That's what people like Benjamin Rush and John Adams both believed, because the spark that ignited the Boston Tea Party didn't actually happen in Boston. It was actually lit in Philadelphia, today in history, October 16th, 1773. And this forgotten and ignored piece of history involves all kinds of fiery protests, bold resolutions, and even letters from a committee formed for tarring and feathering. I think it's a story you don't want to miss, but first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. And let's kick it off here with an article that we just ran by Mike Meharry early this morning. He said the Boston Tea Party is arguably the best known event leading up to the War for Independence. But a number of leading revolutionaries, including Rush and Adams, held that it actually started in Philadelphia. That's because resolutions adopted during a Philadelphia town meeting on October 16, 1773, set the stage for both the Boston Tea Party in December and another lesser-known Tea Party in the city of brotherly love just weeks later. There were a number of other Tea Parties throughout the colonies, and we generally only focus on Boston. But here a little background first from History.com. On May 10th, 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act. This was a bill designed, at least how they describe it, to save the faltering East India Company from bankruptcy by greatly lowering the tea tax it paid to the British government and thus granting it a de facto monopoly on American tea trade. This was a favored business setup, kind of a mercantilist system where only the ones that were kind of in the, hand in hand with the people with power got the benefits. And so Lord North, who actually started the legislation or initiated it, he thought the American colonists would be happy to pay less for company tea, because that was the end result. East India Company tea was going to be lower than the stuff smuggled in or, brought in from other areas. But he thought wrong. And as Meharry put it in his articles, the widely hated, we have to go back a little bit to see what this was all about. A lot of people think, they just initiated the tax on tea, but the tax on tea actually was part of a much deeper exercise of power that the colonists were quite aware of. And we got to go back first to the widely hated and opposed Townshend Acts, or Townshend Duties of 1767 and 1768, where John Dickinson wrote his famous Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania. And that caused significant resistance. They were mostly repealed by 1770. But an import duty, Mike writes, on tea was retained, not just to raise revenue, but to reaffirm that Parliament continued to hold the authority to tax the colonies. At least this is how Benjamin Franklin and other people in the colonies saw it. And this was in accordance with the Declaratory Act of 1766. Those of you who've watched or listened to the show for any amount of time, you've heard me mention the Declaratory Act over and over and over, because this was really the underlying root cause. If we're talking about striking the root, no taxation without representation, the standing armies, the revenue generation, the regulations, all this stuff, the writs of assistance, were all an outgrowth of trying to stop the smuggling, etc., all an outgrowth of this British claim to power over the colonies in 1766 in all cases whatsoever. It was kind of a replicant of a bill that they had passed regarding Ireland with the same kind of language. They just wanted to make sure that no one ever thought that they could make their own decisions without approval from the central government way, way far away. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And Mike writes, the colonists were well aware of this situation. And despite the lower prices, they vehemently opposed the Tea Act because of this assertion of parliamentary power. I think it's very relevant to think about these things. When we hear people with power or seeking power today always kind of offering financial incentives to people to support them. We're always hearing stuff like this. And this is what the British did too. But the American colonists, who actually really wanted to support natural rights and the right to local self-government, they opposed this even if it was financially beneficial in the short term, because the precedent, as John Dickinson put it in response to the Townshend duties, the detestable precedent, actually this is all the way back to the Stamp Act, is what establishes the power for more and more and more. And Benjamin Franklin, in a letter to Thomas Cushing in June of 1773, months in advance, he actually summed up the opposition. He said it was thought at the beginning of the session that the American duty on tea would be taken off. But now the scheme is to take off as much duty here as will make the tea cheaper in America than foreigners can supply us. Let's try to manipulate. Of course, I'm on board with lower prices and less taxes, but you have to think about what's going on underneath as well. And then continue the duty there to keep up the exercise of the right. And when they're talking about the right in this context, and they use this all throughout the revolution, we're thinking like 1760, 1761, till the shot heard round the world in 1775, when they talk about exercising the right, this isn't about getting healthy. This isn't about individual rights. This is a claimed power, a claimed right over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This is one of the ways they did it. Of course, John Hancock, for example, in his Massacre Day oration, I think it was in 1774, so a few months after this incident here, he's actually highlighting the fact that, the issue, again, is the Declaratory Act, and they've used that act in various ways, like taxation. Benjamin Franklin continued, "They have no idea that any people can act from any principle but that of interest. They are clueless that anyone might be interested in something other than a short-term, temporary, small financial gain. And they believe that third in a pound of tea, of which one does not drink, 3 pounds in 10 pounds in a year, is sufficient to overcome all the patriotism of an American." I'm not sure what the calculation numbers there, but basically he's saying all we have to do is, lower prices and you're going to overcome the patriotism of Americans? Not a chance. And later that year, Thomas Cushing was writing back. This wasn't directly back on that letter, but Cushing and Franklin exchanged a number of letters from Philadelphia to Boston and back and forth to London, back and forth over the years. This is a very common conversation. And here's how Cushing put it in a letter to Benjamin Franklin as well. "I cannot well conceive of any one measure that would tend more effectually to unite the colonies than the present act empowering the East India Company to export their tea to America." So it was pretty much understood that this type of action, even with the lower prices, the bribery from government, will make it this cheap for you or a little cheaper for you, and everything will be cool, right? Wrong, because they actually had stronger principles than so many of us today. Now, news of the Tea Act hit the colonies sometime around October, and pretty quickly there was opposition to it pretty broadly, especially in Philadelphia. October 11th, Thomas Mifflin, you may not know the name, but you should, he published a pamphlet with this title, "By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall." It's a pretty familiar phrase to those of us today. And he's recognizing that, when they unite against this claim of right of power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever, you can stand. And anything other than that, they're going to use that power in various ways. And he used a pen name. He didn't publish it under his own name. I think this is pronounced Scaevola or Scaevola. This is a prominent Roman jurist, Meharry writes, and one of the originators of civil law. For a number of years, he actually was the tribune of the plebs. If you know your Roman history, you know what this is all about. This was the first office of the Roman state in the Republic that was open to commoners, the plebs, and considered the most important check on the power of the Roman Senate and magistrates. So when the founding generation, the old revolutionaries, used pseudonyms or pen names, it often told a story. So Mifflin here is talking about checking the power of Parliament, the king in Parliament, etc. And Mifflin addressed it as a letter to the East India Company agents in Philadelphia. Quote, "You are marked out as political bombardiers to demolish the fair structure of American liberty." And then he continued with this, "The eyes of all now fixed on you as on men who have it in their power to ward off the most dangerous stroke that has ever been meditated against the liberties of America." And he also issued a warning. He pointed out that this was just like the Stamp Act. There was no difference between this act and the Stamp Act when you're thinking about the power that Parliament is claiming to control the people in the colonies internally. They were still, many of them, not all of them, Thomas Jefferson and others, didn't think they even had the right to have power over external regulation, but James Madison, I believe, as well. But that was a different discussion. They were actually really, really worked up about a claim to power to raise taxes for revenue reasons. And they issued a warning saying the Stamp Act is no different. He said, you have before you the examples of many of your unhappy countrymen. I mean, some of the stamp masters. So everyone knew what went down after the Stamp Act with the Sons of Liberty. And that's why the British backed off, and then they did this kind of backhanded back off with the Declaratory Act. But anyways, examples which, if properly attended to, may convince you how foolish, how dangerous it is to undertake to force the loathsome pills of slavery and oppression down the throats of a free, independent, and determined people. Man, this is an attitude that is really, really missing today. Like, how dare you even try to shove this down our throats, because we are not going to stand for it, and we have proof that we won't stand for it. And if you want to find out how that goes, just ask your buddies who also work for the government, because they quit. Anyways, Mike writes that 5 days later, a town meeting convened. This is on October 16th, 1773. A town meeting convened in the Philadelphia State House. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Carpenter's Hall, but today it's known as Independence Hall. Led by well-known Patriot leaders, including Benjamin Rush, Colonel William Bradford, and Rush later described that this was the idea of Bradford's. Thomas Mifflin, Dr. Thomas, I always have trouble with this name. Maybe someone in the chat knows better than I do. Cadwallader, I think is how you pronounce it, and other local leaders and members of the Philadelphia Sons of Liberty. The meeting then adopted 8 resolutions protesting the Tea Act. And they started out with a support for natural rights, property rights, and consent. So many of the things that we end up seeing throughout the revolution, of course, in the Declaration of Independence, are natural rights. We don't have these rights as a gift from government, and property rights are the foundation of so much more. As Arthur Lee once put it, property rights are the foundation of all the rest, self-ownership. So here's the first thing that they started with, that the disposal of their own property is the inherent right of freemen, that there can be no property in that which another can, of right, take from us without our consent. Man, serious business. That the duty imposes, number 2. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it'll be linked to in the show notes so you can read it, because it's pretty cool stuff, especially when we get to that committee on tarring and feathering. That the duty imposed by Parliament upon tea landed in America is a tax on the Americans, or levying contributions on them without their consent. This is the taxation without representation, because it's impossible to even have the shadow of consent to the old revolutionaries if you can't even be represented. You can't even choose people who might say, well, we're not going to agree to pass this law. So that was a pretty big deal. Here he continues. He said, from there, the resolutions went on to take the position that such taxation without consent has a direct tendency to render assemblies useless and to introduce arbitrary government and slavery. Of course, this is political slavery. Arbitrary government is government on the whim of people in power. It doesn't matter what the limits are, the rules are. This was one of the grievances, the injuries and usurpations in the Declaration of Independence. The resolutions called the act, quote, an open attempt to enforce this ministerial plan and a violent attack upon the liberties of America. We have to start thinking of attacks on our liberties as violence to us. Well, they asserted it is the duty. I don't want to go off the rails too far on this one today. It is the duty of every American to oppose this attempt. It's not just a good idea. It's a duty. There is a moral imperative. Of course, people like Samuel Adams in Boston always talked about moral duties. It is a duty to take a stand against those who would attack our liberties, no matter where they come from. And that opposition to it is absolutely necessary to preserve even the shadow of liberty. Now, this next one, resolution number 7, really makes me think of Patrick Henry's Virginia resolves against the Stamp Act back in 1765. And I haven't seen anything official in anything that I've read from that time. I've gone through, like I go to of the National Archives, and I look through all these old documents, and then you can schedule it by dates. And I've, basically read every letter I can find from like October-ish 1774 and some earlier to the end of the year, early in 73 and early into 1774. I'm always thinking 1774, so if I get that wrong, my apologies. But it's a very similar approach that Patrick Henry took in his Virginia Resolves against the Stamp Act, May 29th and 30th, 1765, where he said anyone who actually supports this right of internal taxation is an enemy to the people of this country. And that's what they put here in Philadelphia as well. Whoever shall directly or indirectly countenance this attempt, or in any wise aid or abet in unloading, receiving, or vending the tea sent or to be sent out by the East India Company while it remains subject to the payment of a duty here, is an enemy to his country. Those people who attack your natural rights, who violate the Constitution, the limits of power, the founding generation, the old revolutionaries, saw them as enemies to the country. Maybe we could think of it like that as well. And they summed it up like this. They said, don't do it. If you're appointed to do this work, do something else. Quit. Get a real job. From a regard to their own characters and the peace and good order of the city and province, we call on you to immediately resign their appointment. And Mike Meharry points out that Benjamin Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette, I think it's Pennsylvania, not Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Gazette promptly published the resolutions, marking the first public protest against the Tea Act in any of the colonies. I haven't seen anything earlier than this, October 16th or 17th, 1773. And the news of those resolutions soon spread to other colonies. We're going to see how that impacted Boston and other places here just in a moment. But I should point out that I'm citing a bunch of original source documents in this episode, plus a number of other articles and things like that. And if you want to read more and learn more in context on your own time, rather than just getting the highlights of what I think is really important to cover in 20 to 40 minutes, however long I blab on this, you'll definitely want to check out the blog post that we published for this episode, like we do for every single episode. Alan Mosley does an awesome job getting those organized. Make sure to check out his show, It's Too Late, as well. And there's a show links section and also all the different platforms that we're on, both video and audio-only podcast editions. And I'll get that published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. A couple of hours after this live stream is done. And while I'm here, I want to take a quick moment and say hello to everyone out in the live chat. There's Kirk and Jug and Cheriton, Haji, Melody, Duck Duh Police, that's a pretty great screen name, Brewster, Murray and Dan, Ruben, and a few others. Again, I appreciate you being here, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. I don't think I'm mentally here for everyone, but I do my best, of course. But let's get back to this. Now, of course, these resolutions from Philadelphia, October 16, 1773, they get sent out all over the place. They're published in Benjamin Franklin's Gazette. This is a very popular, widely read newspaper, so other people are reprinting it. And then in November 5th, I know this link that I'm citing here says November 3rd. I think that's incorrect. November 5th, a Boston town meeting led by Samuel Adams. Rather than passing their own resolutions, they passed a resolution that adopted all of the Philadelphia resolutions. And here's how they put it. Resolved that the sense of the town cannot be better expressed on this occasion than in the words of certain judicious resolves lately entered into by our worthy brethren, the citizens of Philadelphia. And then wherefore, and then they list the entire set of the Philadelphia resolutions of October 16th. So we know that the Sons of Liberty, primarily on this occasion, led by Samuel Adams, I'm certain Joseph Warren, I would think a number of the other big names were there as well, but they recognize that Philadelphia got the ball rolling and now they're going to run with it. This is very similar to what happened in response to the Townsend Acts as well. John Dickinson wrote his series of 12 letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. November, December 1767, he started publishing them weekly, but also sent them off to James Otis Jr. and Samuel Adams and said, hey, I think this is really important stuff. Dickinson was in Pennsylvania. They were Sons of Liberty in Boston. I think this is important stuff. And then they ran with it and really started going forward. Now, the following week, this is December 7th. Now we get into a few weeks later. Another resolution was passed supporting the Philadelphia resolutions. This is in Plymouth, Massachusetts, pretty famous place. And they say the dangerous nature and tendency of importing tea here by any person or persons, especially by the India Company as proposed, subject to attacks upon us without our consent, are extremely well expressed by the late judicious resolves of the worthy citizens of Philadelphia. We can find all kinds of references to the resolutions in Philadelphia. So that's December 7th, 1773. And we know what happened. I guess it's 9 days later on the 16th. That's when members of the Sons of Liberty, they actually made an effort to call the people who were going to unload the tea to say, hey, meet us here. Let's work this out. They didn't show up. And so members of the Sons of Liberty boarded 3 British ships in the Boston harbor and dumped, I think it was like 340 some odd chests of tea into the water. And Meharry said, this goes even further. It continues rolling. The Boston Tea Party was not the end of it. So on Christmas Day, this is another 9 days later, 1773, the British tea ship Polly, commanded by Captain Ayres, sailed up the Delaware River towards Philadelphia. This ship carried a cargo of 697 chests of tea, so even a larger shipment trying to push it through, consigned to the Philadelphia Quaker firm of James and Drinker. I guess that's an appropriate name for this one. But meanwhile, there was a letter posted. They started publishing because they were taking actions on these resolves that were passed in October. And November 27th, as things were ramping up, they published a letter. It was published as a broadside. So they write a letter from the committees and they put this out all over the place to make sure, and then they hand it out to people. It's like old school communication. They issued a letter to Delaware pilots. Now, pilots are people who guided ocean-going vessels in and out of the harbor. And they warned that they would receive harsh treatment if they tried to bring in the Polly with its 697 chests of tea. And here's a little bit of what they put. All agree that tar and feathers will be his portion, who pilots her into this harbor. And we will answer for ourselves that whoever is committed to us as an offender against the rights of America will experience the utmost exertion of our abilities as, in all caps, the Committee for Tarring and Feathering. So literally, they published this out there, and you can actually see the original. There's a scan of the document that we'll have a link to in the show notes as well. But if you look it up on the screen, it's pretty small here. But it literally ends in all caps. We're going to do the best of our abilities as the Committee for Tarring and Feathering. You should know what that means. If you don't, you're going to find out pretty quickly. Now, Mike writes that when the ship ended up getting close, because it kept going, it was intercepted, I believe, nearby in Chester. I'm not sure how far away. And Captain Ayres was then escorted to Philadelphia by a number of city leaders. On December 27th, so this is 2 days after Christmas, over 6,000 people came out to meet at Independence Hall to discuss how to proceed. A big open town meeting. 6,000 people. I've seen some places listed as 8. Who knows? I mean, if it were today, the New York Times probably would have reported something like 150 neo-Confederates showed up for an illegal gathering and they were quickly dispersed. But you know how that goes. So 6,000 people met at Independence Hall, Mike writes, to discuss how to proceed. At the time, he points out, it was the largest public gathering held in the colonies. I'm not sure of any time, but at least at that particular time. And then on that same day, they passed a number of resolutions saying, well, what are we going to do? And the first thing that they approved, this mass crowd of 6,000 at Independence Hall, I'm not sure if all of them were voting on. I'm not sure of that process. Someone else who knows that history better than me can help me learn, because every single time I do an episode, I'm learning new stuff. And hopefully you guys are as well as I go through this and share what I learn with you. So this is the first resolution. Resolved that the tea on board the ship Polly, Captain Ayres, shall not be landed. Number 2, Captain Ayres shall neither enter nor report his vessel at the custom house. 3, Captain Ayres shall carry back the tea immediately. So no joke, they're not wasting any time. We know that the captain did comply and there was no destruction, like in Boston, of any property at all. Now, I've seen a lot of places, in fact, most places that there's not a lot that actually discuss this, and I never learned it in government-run schools. I'm sure you didn't as well. Maybe someone did. But almost everywhere that you see this, they say, oh, this was a peaceful protest, and probably because the Quaker leaders were just not interested in using violence for these tea ships. But I think this is a crock because there were broadsides all over the place with a threat from the Committee on Tarring and Feathering, like the one that they published an open letter to Captain Ayres, which we're probably pretty sure the man saw. In the first place, they write, we must tell you that the Pennsylvanians are, to a man, passionately fond of freedom, the birthright of Americans, and at all events are determined to enjoy it. That they sincerely believe no power on the face of the earth has a right to tax them without their consent. And the logical next step is that the tea in your custody is designed by the ministry to enforce such a tax, which they will undoubtedly oppose, the people will oppose, and in so doing, give you every possible obstruction. But wait, there's more. They get even more aggressive. What think you, Captain, of a halter around your neck, 10 gallons of liquid tar decanted on your pate, with the feathers of a dozen wild geese laid over that to enliven your appearance? The sarcasm on this is pretty awesome in my mind. Only seriously think of this, they say, and fly to the place from whence you came. Fly without hesitation, without the formality of a protest. And above all, Captain Ayres, let us advise you to fly without the wild geese feathers. So I know that there was no violence at the Philadelphia Tea Party, and they turned around with those 600 plus chests of tea. But it's not just because they were Quakers and didn't believe in using violence to defend their rights, because we know there were all kinds of threats, and this dude was just like, no way. I mean, what would you have done at that point? Taking the tar and feathers? At some point, you got to get to higher ground and think of something better to do rather than just take a beating. Now, even at the time, a number of people recognized that the Philadelphia resolutions were really what kicked off things in Boston, New York, and elsewhere. Here's Thomas Cushing of Massachusetts writing, I think this is to Benjamin Franklin on December 10th, Philadelphia began and passed their resolutions above a month ago. Maybe that's prior to a month. I'm not sure. New York catched it from them, and so it passed on to this government in Massachusetts. Here's Samuel Cooper in another letter to Benjamin Franklin. This is a day after the Boston Tea Party, December 17th, 1773. And he's kind of going over some of the events. He said, upon information that the tea with the American duty upon it was certainly shipped and might soon be expected, we heard of an opposition forming in New York and Philadelphia, and measures concerning there to induce a resignation of the consignees. Our patriots, determined to second their brethren in the other colonies, appointed a meeting of the people at Liberty Tree at noonday to receive the resignation of the consignees for this province, but they chose not to appear. So we know, of course, the story that we're told is that they just decided they had this meeting and they ran out and they dumped the ship. No, they actually said, you guys have an option here. You can resign or, well, something else. And so they called for them to resign. They didn't come in and resign like what happened in Philadelphia with 6,000 people present and letters from the Committee on Tarring and Feathering to say, you might look good in some wild geese feathers. Now, here, that's Samuel Cooper, December 17th, 1773. And years later, as I mentioned right at the beginning, Benjamin Rush, in a letter exchange with John Adams over a period of number of months, were discussing the history of the resolutions and pointed again to the Philadelphia resolutions as the spark that ignited the Boston Tea Party, and actually much more. And this is again how it was put. The active business of the American Revolution began in Philadelphia. John Adams had suggested it was sending the tea ships back, or the letters to send the tea ships back that happened before the Boston Tea Party. And Benjamin Rush explained, no, we actually had these resolutions that happened in October as well. You may have forgotten that. This is, of course, many years later. The flame kindred on that day soon extended to Boston and gradually spread throughout the whole continent. It was the first throe of that convulsion which delivered Great Britain of the United States. And I know I say this every single episode, but I never learned any of this stuff without going out to learn it on my own. As Abigail Adams wrote to her son, John Quincy Adams, I'm just taking this one off the top of my head, but learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and love and diligence, in essence. And I love this history, and I love sharing it with you, and I think it's so relevant for what we again face today, and that is the largest government in the history of the world. And if you want to help us reach and teach more and more people about this forgotten and ignored essential principles, essential history from the American Revolution, even further back, and then also about the Constitution and liberty, how to defend both when government refuses to do so, which is 24/7, 365. Absolutely nothing helps us do this work more every single day, more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. So if you got a couple of bucks of that quickly depreciating dirty government fiat, throw it our way. We certainly punch way above our weight class as small team here at the TAC. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I really appreciate you being here. You can also do a few free and easy peasy things to help us spread the word, like smashing the like button, subscribing, getting notifications on all the video channels, leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, other podcast platforms, comments, especially in the archive on any of the major platforms. That'll help trigger algorithms and tell them to show us to more people, and it's really working a lot. There's no way I could get this message out to as many people as we've been doing, even though we're still scratching the surface without your help. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. I hope this was interesting. I hope you learned something. I hope it made you think. That's more important than anything. Hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.